What is the difference between a mere obligation, a sense that one ought to behave in a certain way, or even that one owes something to someone, and a debt properly speaking? The answer is simple: money. So we're going to talk about money in this chapter and how most of what has been explained about money by economists, but especially Adam Smith, is very wrong. Economists speak about the origins of money, for example. Debt is always something of an afterthought. You get barter and then money, which they mean coinage, a physical medium of exchange, generally boiling down to precious metals. And then you get things like credit and securitized derivatives and stock markets and all of these things. It's important to recognize that money is not coinage, and we'll expound a little on that in further chapters. Adam Smith is essentially telling a story, and it forms the basis of how we think about the economy. And it's crap is the thesis of this chapter. There's a reasonable amount of evidence for it. So the first kind of money we have is a record of Mesopotamia. It isn't coins, it's credit, denominated theoretically in bars of silver, but fixed to the price of barley, and silver is almost never circulated. Ownership of the silver can change, but it never actually moves, and it's never actually used in any sort of coinage format. It's mostly in just whatever lumps come out of a forge. It wasn't stamped. It was in, Adam Smith called it rude bars. And it was fixed to barley because that's what priests, who are essentially the managers of many municipalities, paid temple workers in. So the story of deployment of a scarce commodity as a currency, which is what Smith proposes, he points to like cod in the Netherlands. Salted cod was used as a currency. It was essentially just a trade good against a credit in somebody else's books. It's instead a unit of account in Mesopotamia, which developed before coinage was ever stamped out. From here, the idea that Smith presents kind of unravels because we didn't follow along his straightforward path of economic technologies. Since we, at the start of civilization, were perfectly capable of arranging commerce without coinage and on credit, and historically, coinage is generally in such short supply that for a large purchase, it's easier to write an IOU or some kind of similar contract. David Graeber gives the example of our word for stockholder. It comes from a token, a hazelwood stick broken in half, marked to signify an amount owed. You were the holder of that stock. And these tokens could circulate in place of coinage in a small community because you knew how much was owed to who. You didn't need a stamped coin. So we have all kinds of credit instruments that have developed over time. And compare this to the age of exploration. Europe came in contact with many native tribes and colonized their land, or American westward expansion, similar, but it's important to note that Smith used an imaginary native tribe in his example of how barter would evolve into coinage. Nobody actually ever found a land of barter, even though plenty of societies existed without coinage and organized their resources without a need for it. But the opening to many economic texts, Graeber cites 6, open by asking us to imagine a land where barter is the standard, and then tells us how inconvenient that would be, and so they must have invented coinage or money as a sort of improvement as an economic technology. But the world they ask us to imagine is our world, but somehow there's no currency, but all the forces that shaped currency for our particular historical situation still exist. So obviously we have to invent currency. This is the beginning of Graeber's argument that our current thoughts about economics are historical and contingent on specific circumstances. He's not, however, making the argument that barter never occurs, just that we never based all interpersonal exchange on it. Barter tends to happen between two groups who are somewhat remote or distant, and here the text gives 2 examples of tribes who have particular rituals when encountering another tribe, both of which open with music and dancing, where trades happen between individuals. The exchanges are a sort of faux argument about what the trade is worth, and they frequently devolve into real violence. And the another tribe in Australia, where exchanges are generally made collectively for one good that a particular tribe specializes in for another good that another tribe specializes in. After both tribes dance together, sleep together, make the exchange, and then eat together. This is a little bit of a simplification, but the general idea is that barter is somewhat of a hostile activity. You're actively trying to get the better of someone else. And by mixing sociability and hospitality, each group is less likely to feel taken advantage of in the exchange. In the more modern sense, a wining and dining is common in business, and you're more likely to give favorable treatment to somebody you like versus someone you feel is trying to get one over on you. But this is a difficult relationship to track on a supply and demand curve. Economists rarely see overlap between exchange and commerce and other social situations or spheres of human activity like sociability. And it really never occurs to them that getting laid and exchanging goods could happen at the same time, which makes sense for economists. The story of exchange isn't as in the modern sense specifically because of the United States. So when Australia wants to trade with India, who each have their own currency, they do it in US dollars because the US position discussed previously, but it also adds to the idea that the particulars of exchange are based on a historical set of circumstances and not an immutable story of economic progress as the economic textbooks would describe it. So what we have here is literally the myth of barter in the sense that it was a story created for a reason. And we'll take a look in the next chapter about what that reasoning might be and some alternate stories about the historical perspective. As usual, if this was helpful to you at all, make the necessary sacrifices to the algorithm and check out our podcast for more discussion. And until next time.